Welcome to the podcast, fellow griever. I'm Melissa, your host, and I'm with you on this journey because my own incredible 21-year-old son, Alex, died by suicide on August 7th in 2016. My world was shattered, but slowly, bit by bit, I began the difficult journey of rebuilding a new life, just like you may be doing right now. So know that I see you, because I am you. Thank you so much for being here. It truly means more than I can say. And if you are new to the podcast, please consider listening to the introduction, Meet Me, episode number 1, which is now linked in the show notes starting in late season 6. Listen to know what to expect from the podcast, to learn more about me, and so that you will know all that I offer in my community for support, connection, and healing. If you are not a new listener and haven't listened to this Meet Me episode recently, it's updated and you may learn something new. Every week, we will continue to explore the questions that haunt us, seek the courage to uncover the healing tools within us, and offer the comfort of a community we all need so very much. Come along with me, because this is so very lonely, but we do not have to be alone. Together, let's choose to find meaning and even happiness amid the leftover pieces before us. Welcome to today's episode. Hello, fellow grievers, and welcome to the Leftover Pieces Suicide Loss Conversations podcast. And I'm Melissa, your host. Today, this is season 6, episode 53, and we are starting day 1 of Suicide Prevention Awareness Month very intentionally with this episode featuring my guest, Kim Burditt Bartlett. Kim is a suicide loss sibling. She's also the senior manager of family engagement for Stop Soldier Suicide's Black Box Project. She creates trauma-informed resources as well and has gone on to co-found the Sibling Strong Retreats. So, what is the Black Box Project? And I'm going to try to explain it to you plainly because it is very involved and extremely powerful, but I don't want to get into the weeds for this part. So, it is a research and care initiative at Stop Soldier Suicide that, with family consent, analyzes data from devices of people who died by suicide to identify behavioral patterns and risk signals. Those insights are used to build models and interventions that reach others sooner. The project recently released its first findings after 4 years of gathering devices, and that's called the White Letter, which was just released at the time of this recording just a few weeks ago, which would be mid-August of 2025, or maybe the last week of August of 2025. In this episode, we're going to talk about why this matters. And I do want to say from the get-go that this project, while it is a part of the Stop Soldier Suicide nonprofit organization, the work they do and the data they are collecting, including the devices, are not just from military people. They are from all suicide loss survivors. So in case you're listening and you're worried that this won't apply to you if your loved one was not in the military, it absolutely does. It applies to all of us. So this matters because, and I think those of you that have been listening to from me for a while understand that while this is not directly a prevention podcast, this podcast exists to help suicide loss survivors live in their life after suicide loss. But I also think you know that postvention becomes prevention, and that is always important. It's always important to walk alongside. And I thought this would be a really good episode and conversation to release to start off what often becomes a prickly month for us as suicide loss survivors, which is September. And this is a different kind of message, even though, yes, it is a prevention message of sorts. It's also about legacy. Because if postvention is done right, it is legacy. and the legacy of the loved ones that are left behind directly inform the intervention and the prevention, which makes this unique. It's something that I've been talking about, you guys, for a long time, saying that the current models that we have to recognize the warning signs are antiquated, they're outdated, and somebody needs to be doing the research to help us in the future identify real risk factors for some of the most at-risk population, which is not the population that the original warning sign models were built for. And you guys, this is it. This group is doing that research. They've been doing it now for a couple of years, and they're finally releasing their first round of research and data. And families that participate in this are not just donors of that data. They're co-authors of new pathways to real critical care for people struggling with their mental health in the future. And I know that September is a noisy month, and I hope that this is a good soft signal for you in a way that we can lean in to help in a way that honors our loved ones and doesn't feel like an assault on us the way a lot of the messaging does this month. So you're going to hear us talk about Kim's brother, John, and the path from personal loss to system-level change that Kim's a part of. You're going to hear me talk about how families are engaged, how consent's handled, and what dignity first looks like in practice. We're going to talk about what the first findings suggest just a little bit, and about detectable shifts before death, and the limits of what this data can and can't say. And the core thesis of this project is prevention to pattern to earlier intervention, which becomes prevention. And this is practical ways that civilians and military families can learn, share, or contribute to this work. And I'm just going to go out there and say that I am contributing Alex's cell phone that I have had for 9 years to be a part of his legacy to possibly make a difference for someone in the future. So, without any further delay, and I know I got a little bit more descriptive in this introduction, but I think it really warranted it. I hope you'll lean in. I hope you'll listen all the way through because, man, there's some amazing stuff, and we had a really impactful conversation. So let's go on to welcome Kim. Oh, and before we get started, grievers, I want to take a super quick pause and insert a reminder that the Because They Are Loved poetry anthology is still open for submissions. Letters, poems, or brief essays to your loved one. I've extended the deadline all the way through September to honor Suicide Prevention Awareness Month and honor that legacy piece that I talked about. That's what I want to lean into this month is legacy. And if writing helps, this is your invitation. I'm also doing a workshop on September 10th, so watch for that invitation. Go to my website if you want to be a part of that. And you don't have to be a part of the workshop, but it's a way to come and see all the details and also co-work and get questions answered or work on your submission there, or you're welcome to just submit it. But how to submit and all the things are on my website. So be sure to go and take a look and join it if it serves you. And of course, leave it if it doesn't. But either way, thank you for considering submitting to this important project. Now, we welcome Kim. Hi, Kim. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's my honor. I'm honestly so enthusiastic to get into this conversation today. Before we go into some of the meat of what we're going to talk about, I want to stop and ask you to share your lost story with the audience.
Yeah, I'd be honored to. And that really was the beginning of all the things in my life that led to what I get to do now. And it's a privilege. When I remember hearing it, I knew nothing about the world of suicide loss until it happened to me and my family. And that was April of 2010. My brother, John, he was my only sibling, almost 11 years younger than me. He was a Marine Corps veteran, and he died by suicide at home. He was living with my parents at the time, and I was living in Massachusetts at the time. And it was relatively out of the blue for us. Even knowing what I know now, working in this field since late 2011, I would look back and say, there were not a lot of warning signs that indicated what was going on for him. Maybe some very small ones, but in the moment, they were not glaring warning signs. And you don't know what you don't know at that time. So when John died by suicide, it was interesting with the experience that I've had since. I've been able to work with loss surviving families for years now. My mom early on said, actually the day that John died, she said, well, I guess we have to tell the truth about this. And it never occurred to me either way. When she said that in that moment, I went, oh, like, would there have been, that was a choice we had to make? Like, I mean, I didn't know. So we have always been very, very upfront about how he died, with the exception of my two children, who were 6 and almost 9 at the time that John died. We did not tell them how he died for the first year and a half or so. They were very close with him. He was their only close uncle. And we withheld sort of the nuts and the bolts of how he died, and then it was self-inflicted for a year and a half. Knowing what I know now, I wish I could change things in that part of the story. I knew it was part of our family history, mental health history, and that it would be part of our story forevermore. Mm-hmm. So I knew there would come a day that I would need to tell them the truth. As a family, my mom, dad, and I were open about it. And we knew early on that this grief was different. We had some sudden losses in our family. I had an uncle that was killed in a plane crash. We had some other losses, but nothing like this. And we knew early on that we were out in the wilderness and didn't have a map. As a state, Massachusetts is pretty resource rich when it comes to suicide prevention. They dedicate a good chunk of the budget to it, although I don't live there anymore. And that meant that there were organizations that had funding. And part of that was for postvention, which I came to learn years later, is support for families like us who have been impacted by suicide grief. So my family and I were introduced to in-person support groups pretty early on. I think it was about 2 or 3 months after John died that my parents started going to a group, and I lived about a half hour away. And a few months later, started going to another group. And I remember my mom calling on the way home from their first support group. And she said, I don't understand how this is going to help. I don't understand how sitting there and hearing these horrible, heartbreaking stories that other people have experienced too, how's that going to help me? And my dad said, let's go back 1 or 2 more times. My mom didn't say a word the first time. But the interesting thing that I think they came to experience and that I have experienced with that peer support, it's so powerful. There's a special kind of magic, special sauce with peer support in anything traumatic that a human being goes through. If you can hear someone else's story, it affirms that you are not the only one. That is incredibly impactful because this just feels so isolating, right? This grief just feels incredibly isolating. I didn't know anyone who had experienced a suicide loss before we did. I knew maybe there was someone in high school who's had a parent that died, but no one that I knew personally. To meet other people and know that we are not the only family that experienced this. And guess what? They look kind of normal too. We thought we were a normal family. Mm-hmm. They look kind of normal too. So it affirms that you're not the only one. When you start hearing people's stories and the things that are happening to them as they're navigating this loss, it validates, I am not crazy. This is happening. I am not alone in this, and I am not crazy for thinking that thought. Other people have thought it too. Peer support, I know for my parents and speaking for myself, was our lifeline. It truly was, connecting with others who know this very specific grief. I often say, I would never say that suicide grief is more difficult or harder than any other sudden or traumatic loss. I don't know that to be true. Honestly, I don't want to find out. I don't think it's more difficult. I think it's just more complicated. There are layers and some pretty specific things that we as suicide loss survivors have to navigate that maybe aren't present in all other types of losses. Maybe some of the elements are, but not all of them. I think there's some pretty specific things that I mentioned that wilderness, we're sort of thrust into this wilderness. We don't have a map and there's no one there to give me a compass and I don't know which way is up. Some of that is unique to this experience, which is why 15 years later, suicide loss survivors are, as strange as it sounds, my favorite people. They're the ones that get what my family's experience has been like, even if none of the details line up. So much of the experiencing of this is the same. And they're the ones that get me and get our experience. Like I said, we were pretty fortunate and plugged into support early on. And I know that made a huge difference for us. Not to say that it made the process easy. I don't know what it would have been like if we didn't plug into support. But just having that sort of community around us of people who understood, who were a little bit further down their journey than we were, was powerful. They were living, breathing examples of hope for us in that, okay, so not only their hair is brushed, it looks like their teeth are brushed, their shoes match, and they're 3 years out. And when you are just a handful of months out, that felt unfathomable, right? I mean, 1 year out just felt, how am I going to do this for a year, let alone 2, 3, 5? And here I am 15 years out. And there are still moments that I think, holy crap, that actually happened in our family. It's still shocking at times. I know that connection to grief support was incredibly powerful for us. For me personally, knowledge is power. I wanted to learn everything I could. So John died in April. That summer, my kiddos, like I said, they were relatively little and I was working part-time and I had Fridays off. So every Friday I took the girls to the beach. And I found, and there wasn't much in 2010, but I tried to get my hands on every book I could about suicide grief, about sibling loss, about why people become suicidal, what is going on for them. This was not my background. My degree at the time was in marketing and communications. I was working part-time because I was home raising my kids, but mental health was not anything I had any understanding about. So I wanted to learn. And in that process, I wish I wrote it down because it almost felt like it happened in a day that I had a sense, I'm going to do something with this. And this was suicide, but I didn't know what the something was. I had no idea how I would break into this field that was completely foreign to me. And I had no interest in prior. So the organization that my parents were getting support through that was running those support groups, my dad got on an email list. And he forwarded me their e-newsletter one day, and they were looking for a part-time suicide prevention trainer to train what are called gatekeepers of older adults. At the time in Massachusetts and in our country, older adults it was the highest suicide rate. Not necessarily the number, but per 100,000, older adults were experiencing the highest suicide rate per that population. So the state had sort of thrown some money at it, and this organization had developed a training, and they were looking for someone to do those trainings. I was not qualified, but I sent in a resume and was fortunate enough to be hired. It was great because it was in the world of suicide, but not too close to home, not too close to my own story. I didn't really have to tell my story. I didn't have to divulge that I had lost a loved one, a family member, my brother, to suicide, unless I wanted to. And I was not in the place that I wanted to. But it still felt like I was doing something, and it was in a way for me to honor him. That led to that sort of part-time gig, and I was also doing some volunteering at the time too, some fundraising walks in my community. That led to exposure for the woman who I was recruited actually to work at a larger national nonprofit that cared for the families of the military's fallen. She worked specifically with military and veteran families whose loved one died by suicide. So active duty and veterans who had died by suicide, creating programming, creating curriculum, creating support documents and literature and booklets for those families and events around the country. It was great because it was a way for me to marry my professional background with this new personal experience. And what I had come to understand was, okay, this is going to be my life's work. I didn't really know what it would look like. I knew I needed to make space for it. And I knew that it would be a way to kind of keep my brother present in my life. I think I mentioned John was almost 11 years younger than me. So it was interesting because he was 27 when he died. And it felt like we were starting to connect more in the sense that when you're adults, age gaps don't matter quite as much. But earlier in his life, he's 5 and I'm going to the prom.
I have a brother 9 years younger than me. One that's 2 years that I grew up really close to, but the 9-year younger brother, I didn't really know him until we were adults.
I would joke, it felt like John and I were raised by 2 separate parents, right? I was an only child for so long, and I had Cheerios and toast, and John got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cereal or juice boxes. I wasn't allowed. But as he got older, it felt like we were going to be able to come together, right? So I really felt gypped by that. I think maybe subconsciously at first, but working in this field felt to me a way to keep a connection to him. I knew that keeping a connection to him was going to be important because I also knew very early, the day that John died, I remember thinking, again, I was like a half hour away, driving to my parents' house. I remember thinking, everything changes today. Everything is changing today. It was a magnitude, even more so than the day I gave birth or the day I got married. The weight of it felt so different that everything is different today. And I think a lot of suicide loss survivors, they've shared, we feel like there's the before and there's the after. And they are 2 separate lifetimes sometimes, it feels like. When I started working full time in the field, I knew that my heart was drawn to caring for those impacted by this. I was so fortunate to be able to do that with that nonprofit that I mentioned, to be able to kind of just meet folks who have experienced this from all over the country, all walks of life, all backgrounds. Again, suicide doesn't discriminate. I mean, if every socioeconomic, I mean, it doesn't matter, right? And that all of us just benefit so much from connecting with each other and understanding we are not the only ones that have experienced this, and that there can be healing experience after. Understandably, forever changed, forever different, right? I mean, it is profound. Even now, when wonderfully happy things happen in my life, there is always just this little undercurrent, right? My oldest daughter got engaged this past weekend, and it's wonderful and happy. And when, of course, we're thinking about wedding, and I'm thinking, yep, and your uncle's not going to be there to see it. Your sibling is supposed to do life with you, right? It's your childhood, my teenagehood, with John being little, but they're supposed to be part of your adulthood too. And I don't have that. That means my children and all of my future life events, he doesn't get to experience that with us. I just feel so fortunate that I've been able to do the work in this field, specifically with loss survivors. Along the way, I had a dear mentor. She had lost her husband, also named John, and her first name was also Kim.
Oh, wow.
We really connected. But she was a social worker prior to her husband's death. Having that clinical experience weighed very differently on her because losing a spouse is unique in that loss. But she had dedicated her life and was doing this work too, and was a true mentor and just a dear friend. She's since passed away. But she said to me along the way, you should go back to school and get a degree. And I was like, I don't need my master's. I don't want to go back to school. I didn't understand what it would do for me. And I knew I did not want to be a therapist. I just knew that is not. And she said, well, okay, so a social work degree would be a little bit different. You could focus more on community and more of an advocacy role for in your work, suicide loss survivors, than therapy or direct care like that. So I followed her lead and did eventually get a master's in social work, which, like I said, I have the personal experience, which informs so much of how I approach working with suicide loss survivors. And then I've got the education and professional experience too. I don't think I would feel as confident in my work and approach if I didn't have all 3, because they inform each other. Just because I have experienced this doesn't mean I'm an expert in it. I mean, I'm an expert in my grief. That's about it. I was really fortunate to do the work I've done, sit at the feet of the greats in the field and learn from them, support it with education, which has been helpful too. I think about even now, I remember thinking back in the early years, the loss support group that I went to, I remember the facilitator saying, one day you will come to a place, I promise you it'll happen. I can't give you the date on the calendar, but one day you will come to a place where the very first thing you think about when John comes to mind won't be how he died. And I remember thinking, that she's crazy. How's that going to happen? Maybe that happened for her, but that's not going to happen for me. That's not going to happen for us. At the time, it was the dominating feature. How did this happen? How did we miss it? I'm his older sister. Why did he not come to me? Why did I not see it? I wish I had kept that calendar or thought to write it down. I don't know that I experienced it in one day, but she was right. Now, the very first thing that comes to mind is not that John died by suicide. It's who he was. Who he was as an uncle, who he was as a brother, all the funny stories. People are not defined by how they die. I remember the first time someone said that to me, and that was kind of a light bulb. Like, oh my God, yeah, that happens to be the very last sentence in a novel that was a whole life. You don't understand the story when you read the last sentence of any book. So why would we think that would define someone? And every other type of death, it's not a judgment. We don't place a meaning on, you know what I mean? It's just, it's how they died. And it has no bearing on who they were in life, how they loved, who they loved, how they lived. Exactly. And I think it is such a privilege for me to be able to share so much that I've learned along the way with other loss survivors. I attribute it to who I learned it from as much as I can, because I didn't make this up. I'm not the genius that came up with, but so many things that I held on to were just so helpful in those early years. As we approach what felt like really meaningful milestones. John died on April 21st. So the 21st of every single month, impactful, felt like such a weighted day. And then that's kind of dissipated. I don't know when that happened, but now the 21st of every calendar doesn't impact me the way. I might not even recognize it now. But those milestones in the moment, it was so beneficial to lean on those who had been doing this for a little bit and who could share what they had learned in hopes that might be helpful for me too. Not advice. No one likes to be should on. You should do this. You should do that. No one likes that. But hearing what had been helpful for other people in hopes that it might be for me was incredibly beneficial, and still is. It still is.
Yeah, it still is. You're right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna. First of all, I want to thank you for all of that. It was incredible to hear somebody else's story. It also feels like an honor. I know it's still hard. I mean, people talk about, does it get easier, Kim? And I always say it doesn't get easier. Different. It gets lighter. It gets different. It changes. Yeah. We become stronger under the weight of it. I often say I'm more accustomed to it. It's become a part of who I am, not just something that happened. I went through an evolution and an integration with it over time. And you being 15 and we just passed the 9-year mark. Again, I never, like you, I just have to say that to my audience, if you're new, you'll hear me say some of this. Many of my listeners have been listening for a long time. Yeah. So I have to start by saying, I promise I didn't plant her to say all of the things that I say all the time, because I quit taking notes because you were saying so many things that I'm thinking some of my regular listeners are going to be like, she handpicked this girl because she says everything that Melissa says, but there's so much truth in it. You talked about how lonely this is, right? And doing it with other people. As I'm staring at one of my own bookmarks on my computer that says, this is lonely, but you do not have to be alone. That was at the beginning of my website for a reason, right? I didn't sit around coming up with a slogan. That just became something that I said a lot because it's a truth, because this is so isolating and lonely. You also talked about worse versus complicated. And I say that all the time. I say everybody's worst loss is their worst loss. And we don't get to compare, well, my loss is worse than yours. But I can say, after hundreds of conversations and all the people I've met over the years and all the moms in support community, this is complicated. This is definitely more complicated by nature of the fact that most traumatic death, sudden traumatic death, which can be anything from accident to overdose to cars, things like that, anything that's sudden and traumatic probably bears some overlap and similarity. And then there's still the idea that all the complications that go along with the idea that we don't understand in the beginning everything we come to understand later about suicidality and the suicidal mind. So in the beginning, we're just saddled with the differences as our loved one died by their own hand. And then there's that idea that it was a choice. And I say idea because that even becomes different over time and understanding that it's not the same choice to pick up my glass of water and take a drink. Right. It's not a choice in that matter. If you truly understand the suicidal mind, you do understand that the choice isn't exactly as cut and dry as people want to make it. That it's not much different of a choice than somebody dying by cancer or at the hands of addiction. But you also use the word knowledge is power, and I have worn that phrase out because I'm a true believer. When I tell people, when you learn to turn back towards their life and away from that moment of death, which is why I'm a narrative therapist, I believe in separating the event out. We are not somebody whose suicide loss defines loss happened, and it's a part of us, but it's not who we are. The more you learn about all of it, the more equipped you are to live a more productive life and to stand in the place of saying what you did, which is that one moment. And the cause and the moment of their death is where suicide loss survivors get stuck.
Yeah.
And that's the period at the end of their story. What about all those words before? And that's what we have to learn to turn towards. You also talk about not shoulding on yourself. And I tell people that all the time. Can't should on ourselves. It doesn't do us any good, right? No. But you're right that I have a point I wanted to make, but I want to leave that to the end. So I never had any idea I was going to work in this field. I'm a retired executive chef, and I had been helping my husband do something completely different. And then Alex died. I still tried to spend a couple of years doing something different, and I couldn't ignore the calling of my heart to help survivors. I actually got asked to come on another podcast. I just put it out on my social media. It was released a couple of weeks ago. It was a podcast called Uncomfy, which I'm like, oh, I can be on that podcast all day long because my life is uncomfy. And they wanted me to lead with the idea that I was willing to talk about Alex's death honestly from the very beginning. And I don't know if you and I even talked about that in our initial conversation. I don't think we did either. When you said that, I thought, I just talked about this very thing. Somebody asked me because it's in my bio somewhere that they read. And the reason I did isn't as sparkly as people might want to make it. I told the gal that asked the question on the Uncomfy podcast, she said, you had the forethought to say this, or I said, I wish I could tell you it was forethought. It wasn't something that I did like, oh, we're going to do this on purpose. I instinctively led with just saying how Alex died because it didn't occur to me to do different. And that's what you had said. Is it just that when your mom said those words, I guess we need to tell the truth. Your instinct was the same as mine, which is, well, why wouldn't we? And so when she said, I'm curious of why you did that, I said, I didn't occur to me to be ashamed of anything with my son, like anything, let alone how he died. So I didn't say Alex died by suicide, but I said Alex ended his life. And that's how I started. I wrote his obituary, and that's how I started it. Alex ended his life. It just tells me that somewhere inside of me, I already knew, even if I didn't, that I was setting myself up to do this kind of work. Because from the beginning, I didn't even understand the stigma. Until you live in this world, don't. Until it's a part of your reality, you don't. And you guys leaned into peer support. I tried and couldn't find it. I lost Alex in 2016, and it was kind of a barren wasteland then. We saw the tick in young suicide really start. Suicide numbers started increasing around 2007, but they really spiked in 2014. And Alex died in 2016, so he was kind of on that leading end. Like you, I didn't have any prior experience or real touch points with suicide. I later realized my grandfather's brother had died by suicide, but I didn't put that together for many years. He was my grandfather's brother, and I don't even know if I was born when he died. All I ever knew is that it was talked about in the family in a very matter-of-fact, almost derogatory way. Whenever they brought up Don's death, it was something derogatory, like, well, Don was an alcoholic and he just offed himself in his truck, or that kind of thing. They never used the word suicide. They never talked about mental health issues. It was just this matter-of-fact statement, and you never heard them talk about anything else with him. And so it hadn't occurred to me until years after Alex was gone that we did have a family member that had died by their own hand. That family, as it happens to be, is riddled with mental health issues. And even some of my mother and her siblings have had suicide attempts. So there's obviously something potentially in the genes there. Different discussion, different day. But, it doesn't. And nowadays, we're only being 9 years in for me and only 15 for you. And I'm saying only because some people go, oh, you're so far in. For me, it still feels like there's no way it's been 9 years. It can't feel like 15 to you. Yeah. Time's just so wonky after a substantial loss like this. At the end of the day, until you know what you're living in, you just don't know you don't know what it's going to bring to your world.
Blissfully ignorant. Wouldn't we love to go back?
I say oblivious a lot too. Wouldn't we like to go back to when we were just oblivious? Everything was happy-go-lucky, and we had the good fortune of not when you think of all the people that can't handle our loss that end up going to the wayside. I see you shaking your head because everybody listening is doing the same thing. I want to be really gentle with early grievers. So any early grievers that are listening, there are exceptions to the rule. There are occasionally somebody I've met that says, oh, I haven't lost hardly anybody. I have a really good support network. That is so few and far between, unfortunately. There isn't any judgment on my part anymore. There probably was in the beginning, but they just can't do what they can't do. Some people can't make room for the possibility that this could touch their life.
My family looked pretty normal.
We have a conception that it's something's wrong with the family, or there was something you couldn't possibly understand or know that must have been going on. Because they want to find a way to blame. I'll say somebody's child dies in a DUI accident, whether they were the DUI driver, so there's someone to blame. Yeah. If somebody dies of an overdose, they can blame the dealer or the bad influence friend. There's still something to blame. And where illness is concerned, it's still an illness to blame. It was not something they did to themselves.
It's the hardest thing to reconcile, because the person that you lost and that you love is the one that it was by their hand. How do you reconcile that?
As we build up to talking about what I'm really excited to talk about, the case is that we just think, or we did think as a society, and we're trying to change that, that the person that fit the suicidal mind, or in our mind, somebody that could die by their own hand, now that we know that model is so old and antiquated, it was built for middle-aged men. We'll kind of say men going through midlife crisis, all the warning signs when I say the model. But if you go back further in history, there's this preconceived notion of it's the people that something's really wrong with, i.e. they're super bad mental health issues, or addicts, or and not to say mental health and addiction go hand, because they do go hand in hand. But you know what I'm saying? They're envisioning the homeless addict that can't ever get their shit together type of thing. Or the student who's
they have nothing to live for.
The isolated, withdrawn student or kid in the family who just can't fit in, who is always looking depressed, who's an underachiever. And yet I've spent years talking to family after family, finding out that 90%, my rough estimate, of everybody that dies by suicide that I talk to doesn't fit that model. They're usually overachievers, overly empathetic. The last person that somebody would have thought in their circle that this was going to happen to. They're usually smart, well-spoken, lots of times creative, like all these things. A lot of times they love animals. I keep seeing these qualities over and over again. I'm like, the warning signs. And so then you got all these bereaved people coming to the place where they're seeing all these warning signs and being told every suicide is preventable. Worst thing to say to somebody. We can absolutely come a long ways with prevention and try to turn this around. But to say every suicide is preventable.
No, it isn't.
It's not, any more than every murder is preventable or every case of cancer is preventable. Even when you get cancer under control, there's still going to be people that die by it. Even when we instilled seatbelts, people still die in car accidents.
That's right. We're human and we have free will.
And we make bad choices and end up in situations that we can't do anything about. That's where it led me to wanting to talk about how you walked into the suicide prevention or awareness space delicately, but then it's led you to where you are now. When we first connected, I was kind of proverbial jumping up and down, because longtime listeners know I've said for a long time that I feel like we have an antiquated system that tells us warning signs. Were they giving things away? Were they isolating? Were they putting their affairs in order? Most people come to this so distraught saying, how did I miss the signs? And it's like, well, because those signs probably weren't there.
They weren't there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because the models are outdated for our current norm, for the world that we live in today. And we could just say the last couple decades.
I was going to say, for the past 30 years, right? I mean, the needle has really not moved. We can have screeners that they use in the ER, and we can have families.
And tell me where you are on the smiley face scale of 1 to 10 and those things. But
how you feel at this very moment, 2 hours from now, are you going to feel the same way? Probably not. 2 hours ago, I felt differently. Emotions that we feel in any one given day, at least for me, I mean, I only live in my head, but like it's
It can
17
change.
hours. Yeah. I mean, constantly, right?
Yeah, and some places are getting better, and I applaud the progress we're making. Some people are like, oh, we've come so far, and I'm like, we have a long way to go compared to how far we have advanced as a society in 30 years. Some of this is still kind of in the Stone Ages. And the project, what you do now, we're going to talk about how there are people bringing light to that. I want to say that I was speaking to my brother, the one that's 2 years younger than me, that I grew up really close to. He didn't have any children. I'm almost 57, so that makes him almost 54, 55, I guess. And he just had a hip replace. And he was telling me, and he has struggled with depression most of his life. He was more candid about it recently than he's ever been openly with me as far as discussing things. But he told me when he went to get his pre-op screening for his surgery, this was just a few weeks ago, he told me this. He said, and we were talking about mental health, and we talked about Alex a little bit and stuff, and that's how this came up. And he said, I went in, and they made me go into this complicated survey that I had never had to do anywhere before about my mental health. And he said, I'm not laughing, but I can in the context of family. I said, when he said to me, the nurse called me later that day and said, maybe I needed to get into the mental health clinic immediately. And I said to her, well, thank you for your concern. Because she said, based on some of the things you said, we're afraid you're in immediate danger. And he said,
Hours
right.
later. So they
hours later, but go a step further. He said, because this is where my brain went, and I talked to him about it for a minute afterwards. And he goes, wow, that's really interesting. I go, remember what I do now. And remember the world I live in now, Eric. Yeah. He said to me, they said to him, we're afraid you're in danger. And he said, well, I appreciate your concern. He said, but I'll just go ahead and be in to do my blood work and stuff on Wednesday because nothing that I filled out there is any different than how I live every day of my life. Because him and I had been talking about the difference. It was intriguing to him because I don't think anybody's talked to him this way, but I talked to him about the difference between being actively suicidal and suicidality and how so many people in this world do live with suicidality chronically. Like they on some level have this undercurrent of why am I here? But that's different than crossing that threshold into being suicidal.
That's right. I think every human being has, I mean, whether it's
at some level.
I live in New England. We've had winters where it's like, I cannot shovel another. And everyone has had at least a passively suicidal thought. And if we haven't, I think they're lying to themselves. I mean,
who hasn't at some point even said the words, what's the point?
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? What's the point? And they mean, what's the point of going on? This is so hard, whatever. And so, I was trying to explain to him that he said, I guess I shouldn't have been so honest on it when he started off with telling me. Maybe I shouldn't have been so honest because then they called me and said, basically, you need to get in here. We're afraid you're a danger to yourself. And he said, I'm no more danger to myself today than I am any other day. But thanks for, I'll see you on Wednesday. And they were kind of like, okay. And I said, well, two things there. I'm glad that they are at least doing something. But like you said, couldn't they have caught that immediately in the office and come in and said,
so if it's a screening, you think they would review it while he's there, just in case, right?
In case he is actively suicidal, they've said to him, can we get you a psych consult? I mean, they wouldn't say it that way, but would they have talked to him and screened him further in person with, let's talk about what you filled out here on your mental health questionnaire? Because what if that was his, I don't know if you've ever heard Kevin Hines talk about so when Kevin Hines says, if just one person had said, how are you doing that day? I wouldn't have gotten off the bus. One person had cared. So if my brother had been truly suicidal that day and left, it may have been too late. Just that one person standing in there saying to him, how can we get you help? You shouldn't feel this way. We're starting to touch the edge of it, but we're going to have to go further with understanding the difference between the overwhelm or potential suicidality that on some level is an undercurrent to stressful life that we live in our world today versus someone that's truly suicidal. And having it be an open enough dialogue and situation that people don't feel like they can't divulge it. Because that almost made him feel like, okay, I won't be so honest next time. Because it was an afterthought and it was almost like he was being admonished for it.
At least they're doing something. But if they don't, I mean, I think about how would we train our medical community? I mean, to get a doctor to sit for a half-day training even, that wouldn't be enough. But these prevention trainings, you're lucky to get 20 minutes with your doctor because
they're really weak CTEs. Most of us that have ever had to walk through the world of CTEs, we walk through them half awake. I mean, we're like, I got to do these CTE modules. It's like studying for a test in 9th grade. You just study to forget so that you can get through the test.
I mean, in defense of a medical professional who doesn't specialize in mental health, they have other things that they specialize in and things that they have to remember, and that is the focus of their practice. In their defense, I don't expect them to be all things to everyone. I don't want them to be good at everything. I want them to be good at what I need them for. At least they're doing the screenings, but the response needs to, if there is indication that someone is at heightened risk, you need to respond.
This side needs to come to match this side. If the left hand and right hand still aren't talking, basically what it amounts to. But it means maybe there's hope. Now let's start talking about where your work life has gone, because so much hope in what you're about to talk to us about. Please go.
Thank you. I'm so excited to share it. It's interesting because I always give a little caveat when I'm speaking to survivor audiences. I understand that prevention can be a really tough conversation to have, because for so many of us, we did everything prevention told us to do. Every little thing, and our person still died. So prevention didn't work. I get that. And that's why we're doing this project. When I share that it's, yes, this is why we knew there needs to be a different approach. Someone has got to look at this in a different way. Even the beginning of my career, when I had that feeling of I'm going to do something with this, I knew it was not prevention. I was like, no, I don't want to go work on a crisis line. Yet here I am, working on a prevention project.
But like we've said, postvention becomes sometimes the strongest prevention. And I even went so far a couple of years ago to put out an episode that said, this is not a prevention podcast, and I don't apologize for it, because I was getting too many people that were trying to get me to bring them on, and all they wanted to do was the prevention dance. Please don't take that to be, of course I'm for prevention, but it is a sticky thing for those of us that feel like we loved deep enough and did all the things and would have saved them 10 times over, and they still died, and we didn't know. So thank you so much for leading with that, because you're right. We don't want everybody to turn their iPhone off right now and say, I don't want to listen, because this is such a powerful thing that is going to change. And it's something where they're literally learning, and it's part of our loved one's legacy. So thank you for leading with that. So
I currently work for a nonprofit called Stop Soldier Suicide. The core service of Stop Soldier Suicide is free, confidential telemental health care. Our clinicians, social workers, and licensed mental health counselors provide suicide-specific care. Again, it's telemental health, so it's all virtual, it's free, it's confidential. So if someone is active, and this is for veterans and active duty U.S. service members. And what's great about it is, because we are a standalone nonprofit, we are not funded by the government. We don't talk to the VA. We don't provide any records. No one's command is going to get wind that they're receiving mental health support. That is a huge barrier for this population, military and veterans. Because our clinicians, I went through a master's in social work. I'm not a clinician, but I was trained like one. You would be shocked. We do not get a lot of suicide prevention, let alone grief after suicide. And grief in general, but we just don't get a lot of training around that. So our clinicians are specially trained at suicide-specific care. All of that is one side of the house, and I don't work on that side of the house. I work on a separate side of the house that sprung from Stop Soldier Suicide as an organization. This is the third nonprofit I've worked for. They run almost like a startup, more than a typical nonprofit. I think that brings them to have the perspective. They look at things a little bit differently. And that's where this project that I work on, it's called the Black Box Project. It's essentially a tech-driven project, which is going to inform prevention. The best part of it is a living legacy in prevention to those that we've lost. So it can get pretty complicated, because it does get pretty techie, and I'm not on that side of it. That's way above my brain power.
And most of us in the grief world don't have the brain for that, so you can keep it layman friendly, right?
I think everyone understands that the name of the project is the Black Box Project. When we talk about a black box in the context of aviation, we understand what that is. We hear about it on the news with every aircraft tragedy. What does the black box say? The black box tells you what was happening right before that accident. In the seconds, in the minutes, in the hours, the days, months, and maybe longer. The aviation field wants that information so that they can use it to prevent, right? Future similar. What do we do differently the next time, right? In this context, the black box is people's personal digital devices, a smartphone, a tablet, or laptop. And what the project does is we borrow those devices from families who have lost their loved one to suicide. My brother had a flip phone back in 2010, so I couldn't loan it to the project. But if he did have a smartphone back then, we would borrow that device from the family. We do not connect that device to the internet. We do not log into apps. We don't log into someone's banking app or anything like that. What we do is essentially copy the data that lives on that device. Even smartphones, they have a hard drive. It's much smaller than the hard drive on your computer, but they save a lot of the data that the device creates. That data immediately gets de-identified and depersonalized. That's important for people to know because people all the time are asking questions about, well, I just got an email that my credit card company, they had a data breach. What's going to happen with this data? Immediately, it is depersonalized and de-identified. We had to create a software to do this, to filter the data. It removes any references to anyone living.
So it's like redacting the information.
Exactly. Or anything that looks like a known number. It gets depersonalized, de-identified, and pooled with all of the other data we have collected from devices thus far. That data is then analyzed. And what we're looking for is trends and patterns in digital behavior in the weeks before the individual died by suicide, in the months before, in the year before. How did their behavior 3 weeks before they died? What were they doing on their phone or in their digital life? We all have a digital life. How did that look different from a year before they died? Compare and contrast that. We have been doing this for about 3.5, coming up on 4 years. We are incredibly grateful. We've had over 120 families loan us over 200 devices. And we just released our very first, it's a white paper, essentially. It's of our first findings of the data that we have analyzed so far. And it is absolutely fascinating because what we had hoped for in the beginning of this project, we felt like we had to prove 3 things. One, will families loan us these devices? Being a loss survivor, that's my story. I fully understand. It is a huge ask to say, can I borrow your son, your spouses, your daughter, your siblings? Can I borrow one of their possessions? I mean, they're precious to us. Can I see what they were doing digitally before they died? We know that is a ginormous ask. And I so appreciated that they wanted a loss survivor in this role so that it would be a peer because it is a big ask.
Yeah.
So we had to prove, would this even work?
Could we get anybody to even say yes?
Because there's got to be gold in there in terms of learning what people are experiencing. Yeah.
Is a similar ask to if a doctor were to come to you. I do know plenty of suicide loss survivors that their loved one technically was revived, but then they had to let them go on life support within the first few days. So it would be a similar ask to saying, could we take their brain and dissect it? Most would say, no, like, right. I don't want you going in there and cutting up my child or my loved one. Most would say no. So that's how personal our devices are because we know they contain think about how panicked you are if you think you've lost your phone. Because it isn't just a phone anymore. It's got so much data in it. It is a microcomputer that's personally tied to us. And for us family, the thought of losing that is almost the thought of losing a part of them. So it is a huge ask. Going. Thanks for letting me interrupt.
Yeah, we know that. And we also know that this is a decision that takes time. I mean, I've had families come back to me a year after learning about the project and saying, you know what? I wasn't ready then. I'm ready now. Because of those reasons that it does have such personal info, that's also the reason why that data is so important, can teach us so much. What I do on my phone is only known between me and my phone. And it's a first person. It's not, well, a coworker says, yeah, they were acting funny. This is a first person report.
Because they can compare it to how they were acting last month or last year. They can see the pattern shift. So they can graph behavior.
And this is one piece of the story, right? Someone's digital life is just one piece of their life. It could illuminate. This was the other thing we wanted to prove. Could we wrangle this data? Because it's ginormous. One thing we're looking at is communication in general. How people are communicating on their phone. Are they messaging people? Well, even just messaging. Think about all the different ways you can message. You can text, Facebook message, WhatsApp message, TikTok message. They all don't function the same way. So to be able to absorb that info, we had to create a way for those all to talk to each other so they could be analyzed, right? Could we wrangle the data? And then would this data show us actionable something? Would it illuminate places that the suicide prevention field would be able to do things differently? Would we understand places that interventions could be built just in time? Are there places it's going to show ways we can help that we didn't know about before or haven't actioned on before? All of those things we feel like we've proven. And we're so grateful because the next step is to scale this, grow it, and share it with the field. As I mentioned, one thing, my favorite part of the entire project is my role is I get to work with the families. I get to explore the project with them, tell them about it. And it is truly our belief that this is a legacy to those we've lost. For a lost surviving family to say, yes, I want my loved ones' data to be a part of this. It's truly a living legacy that is going to change to maybe shed light for someone in the future who is in the dark right now. We really do believe that. I get a lot of questions about, well, like, what will the interventions be that you would, when we have this digital data and we know what people are doing in their phones, what's an intervention going to look like? I don't know. That's my honest answer. We are not.
You guys are assembling all the data in hopes that somebody else is going to help come up with the interventions. But you gave me an example of what some of them could potentially look like. Can you give those examples?
Absolutely. I think about on the Stop Soldier Suicide, on the clinical side of our work, maybe in the future, we would have a client, and as part of engaging with his therapist, they communicate through an app. And he or she has given permission for that and understands, maybe because of what we learned from Black Box, and this is actually a true finding, by the way, nighttime activity, if you see a device that is active 4-5 nights in a row from midnight to 5 a.m., and you know that person doesn't work the night shift or they're not sleeping, right? You maybe don't even need to know what they're looking at or doing on their phone, just that their phone is active. They're not getting good sleep. That's a very big marker. If I'm that person's clinician, maybe with their permission, they have said, yes, my phone can report back to you if it's active overnight because I'm engaging in my care and I want help. I want to be supported. And if that happens, it's like putting a safety net in place for yourself, right? So maybe I'm that person's clinician and I come in on a Tuesday morning and I see for the past 4 nights, Mr. Smith, his phone has been active. I don't have an appointment with him till Friday. I'm not going to wait till Friday. I'm going to know to reach out now. That's that's sort of my fantasy.
Notice how you're saying, and I want people to hear this loudly, that you're not saying that the hopes are that then we instill a bunch of big brothers in our world, because that's not what anybody wants to be a part of. We want it to be participatory types, like you said, where people think about those of us that, you know, grievers a lot of times in the early days may lean on the glass of wine. Because that may be the case. The bottle of wine. And because of that, either ourselves or people in our lives that we trust may say, are you concerned at all about your behavior? Or we may come to somebody and say, I've got to stop buying wine.
And can you help support me in that?
Can you support me and tell me that I need to brew some more iced tea? It's no different than when you're on a journey of trying to eliminate as much sugar and unhealthy carbs from my life as I can. I have to say to my husband at the store, don't, because he's so kind. He'll say, well, if you want it, just get it. I've had to say to him, I need your support in not putting the sugar in the cart and instead putting an equivalent that will still satisfy. So I'll say, make me get the tangerines. We are able to be advocates for ourselves. So why would we not want to be an advocate to not end up in a suicidal situation?
Absolutely. The technology is there. If you think about, I have an Apple Watch. If I fall down the stairs, Apple has created something that they can ask me if I need help. It will know when I've got to be away. And this is what we're proving, that we can create something that can not only look for things that are indicating higher risk, but, you know, reach out. It doesn't always have to call 911. Create a way that you can, engage with that person to support them. I've given Apple permission to do that for me. If I need help, I want help. Right? So give them the option to engage in that and then create ways that are impactful for them. If a device is showing activity that the data from Black Box has proven indicates
a greater risk,
maybe a suicidal crisis, that person has created what that intervention is going to be. I think about it can be so simple. In Europe and Ireland, there are pictures of black lungs on cigarette packs as a deterrent.
And while that makes me cringe, it also makes me smile. I'm not a smoker. I never have been. But on one hand, you'd be like, but that's the point.
Exactly. So maybe it's something as simple as when that phone is showing behavior that black box data has proven leads to risk, maybe that person has programmed it and up pops a picture of their puppy or their family. They say the suicidal crisis is pretty acute. It's a very short period of time.
Data has shown if we can intervene even just one time, the chance of them getting back there is so reduced. Not to say it couldn't happen, because it does, but lots of times people will say, I only had one time that I was really suicidal in my life. After that, it scared them so badly that they did start to put things into place to not get there again. I had zero plan for this being so relevant. It just came up as you were talking. Nobody listening can see me holding up a card and you can't see what's on it, but it's a printed, folded card that I printed off last week. And this is me being pretty vulnerable here. But at the top of it, it says reset card. And it's a reset card and I don't have to go into the reasons, they don't matter, but it's not grief associated with my son, Alex. It's grief associated with a situation I'm going through with my daughter. And it's fairly activating for lots of reasons. And I'm right in the depths of it. And it's been a lot to take in. And it's sent me to some pretty yucky places lately, and not necessarily suicidal. Although to say, again, suicidal versus suicidality, has there been those suicidality moments? Yes, there has been. I haven't crossed over into being suicidal. But the reset card is there to help. I decided on my own to set it up after the last bad day I had. I'm a coach. I can help other people get out of these places, but the best therapists can't therapize themselves. And so the coach was having trouble coaching herself. But yet I know I have all these tools for grief because I've done grief. I know how to do grief. And so I thought, I know all the things I need to do, and yet in the moment I wasn't doing them, Kim. And so I came up with a way with the help of AI to say, here's all the things that help me. Can you help me put this into a reset card for myself? I wanted him to be aware that I had done this, not because I'm suicidal, but I just wanted him to be aware because he's the one who had to handle me while I was in the depths of being yucky, depressed, sad, crying, and feeling defeated, and wanted to fix it. That's a good thing, right? God bless his heart. But he wanted to fix it, and I was frustrated because I just wanted him to care. I wanted him to be my piglet sitting next to Pooh, just saying, it's going to be okay, and I love you, and it's just here because I want him to treat me like I'm smart enough to know how to fix this. And if I need help, I'll say it. I just need you to love me through this moment. And I said, so I've created this card because I know I have the tools. I know I'm going to want to reach for it next time. I said, if you say to me, you need to go get your reset card, I may get mad at you. A lot of times we just need our own tools to help us. We can help ourselves out of almost anything if we just recognize and make the right choices. Something like this would allow people to make the choices to be their own advocate, keep themselves as well as possible, and know when it was outside of the reset card. When is it, this isn't working, so now I got to call my doctor, or now I got to tell somebody else, or tell my husband, I checked every box and I'm still not there, so let's talk about what we do. It normalizes mental health struggles.
You mentioned Kevin Hines. I saw him just about a year after my brother died. And he, to this day, talks about how he has equipped people in his life. I think back then he made them a binder. Like, when I start to behave like this, here's what you need to do, because this means I'm starting to spiral, or this means I need this type of support. Ultimately, he wants that help. Black box data the types of interventions we can build, future state, I think the sky is the limit. And I think there are going to be some people who are much smarter than me that can help figure that out. And also navigate the privacy things. We can figure that out. It's such a different approach to learning about how people get to that and how they behave so that we can prevent it for other people.
Think about what it could help with young people too. They have devices in their hands very early now. The fact that you could analyze devices of young teenagers and understand that their warning signs could be totally different than a 30, 40, 50-year-old's warning signs. Exactly. That's groundbreaking in itself, because right now we have this outdated one-size-fits-all warning sign chart that just isn't working for the highest population at risk right now.
We've had 3 teenagers that we have their devices. Their family has loaned us their 3 14-year-olds, but their data is a part of our findings so far. What is impactful for me is that this is a way, and it's not the end all be all. This is people's digital behavior. It doesn't tell the whole story.
Yeah, nobody wants to go, oh, they're doing it, so we don't have people.
What we find in a phone or a laptop or tablet is not the reason. But I love that it allows loss survivors like us to help be architects of what prevention is going to look like. I shared this with a group last week, and a woman was just hearing about it. A very similar response to you, Melissa. She was in tears because she's like, I am so encouraged that someone is doing this. Someone is looking at this. Someone is doing something different and trying to learn something that has previously been hidden. Like what you do in your phone is very private. And well, it's between you and your phone. Only your phone knows, right? She said, my son was such a tech geek. He would think this is the coolest thing ever. And she's like, I want him to be a part of this. I want his data to be a part of this because he would think it's really cool. But like to think that someone can learn that I can prevent another mom from experiencing this.
Yeah.
I'm as transparent and as authentic as they come. I want to make sure families feel 100% confident when they participate in this. I go over everything with them so they feel confident in that. We cover all the costs, but where are they shipping their device to? How long is it going to take? What's it look like? We do not produce a report of what is found in any one individual device. I understand that people may want to know, like, what do you find in there? Is the why in there? Is the reason in there? And so, having done this, and by this, I mean grieving my brothers. There's no why. First off, there's no why that would ever suffice. Right. He could stand in front of me and I would go, nope, I disagree. But I don't think it would be horribly unethical for us to just look at that piece of someone, their digital behavior, and say, this is what happened.
This is what happened. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we could never
because there's so many other pieces missing.
There are so many different facets of who they are. Yeah. Just like the last sentence in a book doesn't tell the story. Someone's digital behavior doesn't tell the whole story. But
it's a chapter. In his world, it could be a really important chapter combined with all the other knowledge.
Well, if we can build enough data, which that's really the focus now, is inviting and hopefully engaging with so many more families who want to participate, who are willing to share their device with us and be a part of this community of loss survivors who are saying, yeah, something different needs to be done. Prevention hasn't worked. It hasn't done enough. We need to look at something different. We need to build different ways to intervene. In the veteran population alone, round numbers, they say 6,000 a year are dying by suicide. A third of that are in care, meaning whether it's through a VA or their community, they're receiving mental health care. What about the other 2/3? Right. If they're not raising their hand looking for help, how do we engage with them? How do we get to them? And every other population, to your point, everyone has a device. They know us better than sometimes our own friends and family do. They know what we're doing, know when we're doing it. The data in there, we truly believe can save lives. It's such an honor to work with families. For them, this is a bit of a living legacy. I get to contribute to this in their name. This white paper that I mentioned that we released with our findings starts with the thank you letter dedicated to the families that have participated thus far. This is so impactful for them, and it is such an important decision for them, an important choice should they want to participate in this, because it just carries so much potential. Hope.
Everybody listening knows how important I think legacy is. It's one of my 3 main pillars. Besides needing resources at the time of loss and beyond, and besides needing a connected community that understands, the next most important thing I have found is a way that our loved one will be remembered, and the whole legacy piece.
And meaning and purpose in this grief.
Exactly. Purpose. And when we spoke initially about having this conversation, you shared all this with me. I'll let everybody know, Kim didn't even ask me for Alex's device. At the end, I said to her, I want Alex to be a part of this. And if you'll take his device, I want it to be a part of this. I know they're going to get it back to me. But I did tell her that if I was earlier in my grief, that might have been something I had to sit with for a while. Because we do cling to those things that's so important for so long. And people aren't ready till they're ready. And I didn't even have to think twice about it, because at the end of the day, while Kim told me to date, nobody's device has been lost. Everybody's device has been returned. You take extra steps to make sure the packages are handled.
We do.
You don't just rely on the post office. You've got special things in place. Yeah. So that said, I did say to her, I'm far enough along that if for some reason something happened, I know that Alex is not that phone. I wouldn't have felt that way years ago. I would have needed a lot of reassurance. You and I might have needed one of those consultation calls that you give other people, knowing that's there, that you can walk people through all the assurances.
Yeah.
I hope anybody listening that wants their loved one to be a part of it, that they know that in the show notes, I'll have the way that they can reach out to you. Let the loved ones be in connection with Kim so you can see whether turning one or more of your loved one's devices in to help with this vital research, but also, like you said, piece of living legacy that could really help. I'll put those in the show notes. Do you want to tell people how they can find you or the Black Project?
So the website is Stop Soldier Suicide, all those words, .org, because we're a nonprofit, and then /Black Box Project. You get me. And I love to offer people, do you want to do a phone call with me? Do you want to do a Zoom? Sometimes it's really helpful to see a real life person behind this. And I share my story to the extent that it matters. I let them know that I'm a loss survivor and I understand the weightiness of this. We talk about the ins and outs of it. And I've done a Zoom with a whole family before. I'll talk to one member of the family and they'll say, I need to talk to my spouse and my surviving kids.
Then my older children want to weigh in. And
that's right.
Then just put the whole family on the
right. Talk about the risks. We do everything we can to secure that, but life happens.
It is a possibility. Does. Exactly. And inevitably it may happen. And people at least have to be prepared for that, right? It wouldn't be the strangest or the worst thing that ever happened to any of us. If losing his phone was going to be the worst thing that happened, I could live with that. That isn't the worst thing that's happened. So if that happened, I think I could live with it, right?
Yep.
So especially if I knew that the data was there. If the phone got lost on the way back to me versus on the way to you, that would be my preference. But I won't focus on that because you guys haven't lost devices. So I just know that's something that comes to people's mind, especially in today's world where we know there's so many packages out there flying around. So we'll put that in the show notes, a way for them to contact you. As we wrap up, I want to know if there's anything we haven't talked about. And then if you feel like you've covered everything, give a little note of hope at the end for everybody listening.
The one thing that we didn't cover is if people have questions, if their device is locked and they don't have access to it. We do own, it's been donated to us. You can read about this on our website in that white paper I've mentioned. This software has been donated to us to unlock locked devices. If you follow the news and any court cases that have to do with cell phone data, you'll know the names. They throw them around in court cases, the same stuff that we have. I always, again, I'm very transparent. It is not an exact science. It is never a guarantee that we can unlock a locked device. We are usually successful.
And with that, you can then return it to the family with the proper code so they can get into it.
So they can get into it if they desire.
If they desire, and I'm going to say something, and I think you're going to say it too in your own way, that means Kim would probably talk you through, if your device was locked, being mindful of the fact that if it comes back to you unlocked, you could be, you may want to be, but you also may not sure you want to be, depending on how long you've lived with it locked. Are you ready for the fact that it may complicate things for you again and throw you back into a space of new information that still isn't going to contain the why? That it could complicate your grieving process, and you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah. I sort of counsel in a very unofficial way. If you haven't had access to a device and you get it back and you want to access it, sit with someone close to you that, just in case. I don't know their loved one's story. I don't know the ins and outs. I've worked with enough families to know through the years, there may be something in there that you didn't know before. That might be a helpful thing, and it might not be. And you won't know until you're in there. And it doesn't change the outcome. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change that you love them. None of that changes.
That they're gone.
But there may be something in there that complicates your grief. So think about that. Maybe you give it to a friend to look at first. But again, the survivor in me, I get it. If there's pictures in there, I want to get them. I totally understand that. So,
and that's one of the biggest frustrations of especially families that can't get in, is they know that all the photos and videos that their loved one had on there are locked from them. And there's a lot of those memories in there. So much good can come from this. This is always a difficult topic. I wish we didn't need this, Kim. Suicide wasn't a global crisis. I wish it wasn't, but it is. So we have to hit it head on. And this is such a breakthrough. I'm so thankful you reached out and that I get to share this with my audience.
Melissa, thank you so much.
Any words of hope or last?
Words of hope for everyone who is engaged in your community and listening to the podcast. The very first thing is to engage with it and surround yourself with people who get it. From my own experience, as I shared, that was the most helpful thing and continues to be my people, my tribe. They're living proof that this is survivable, even in the moments it doesn't feel it. profoundly impacted the rest of your life? Yes. But you can thrive again in your life. You can feel joy again. You can have those moments. They will be different than what we knew before, but you can have it again. And if you don't feel that, lean on the people in that community and borrow it from them. Kind of lean on them because
I kind of call that faking it till you make it. Get in there and do it and participate until it resonates with you. And just like you said with your mom showing up in the beginning and saying, how is this going to help? I always tell people, don't attend just one meeting because the overwhelm of that one meeting is so hard. Oh my gosh. The first meeting I went into in person, I thought, I don't know if I can go back just because you're so overwhelmed. And you do go and start to see over time, we're not just going to sit in there every time and just gruelingly go over our lost stories. You start to share life and coping. How are we living with this? And at least if you're in the right support group, if all that's happening is every time everybody's sharing the tragedy story, then maybe you do need to look somewhere else.
You try them on and they all don't feel the same. Some fit great.
Hey, my podcast, I'm not this is not a one size fits all situation. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. So the same thing is going to happen with support groups. You find the one that fits. But in my opinion, the most successful support groups are communities where they are holding each other up to live forward with this.
That's right.
And relating to each other in the struggles in doing that. So it isn't just about, I have to relive it all the time. That's not what support is about. There was so much here to listen to and such great information. And I'm so thankful that we connected.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much, Melissa.
You're so welcome. You have a great day and we will talk again soon. Okay, bye-bye.
So thank you for joining me today, Grievers. If today's episode resonated with you, please consider subscribing to get weekly updates when I drop new episodes. And please take a moment to rate and review the podcast with 5 stars, especially on Apple Podcasts. Your support helps so much because it's how others are able to find the podcast and this community. Remember, though it may feel impossible now, hope and healing are within reach. I invite you to connect further by visiting my website, theleftoverpieces.com, where you'll find support, legacy options, retreats, resources, online Zoom groups, and so much more. Together, we can navigate this journey of healing. We can put our hearts, our leftover pieces, back together. And as they say here in Puerto Rico, poco a poco, juntas podemos. Little by little, together we can. Take care and talk soon.